Good morning.
Good morning.
Each year as I get older, I have to keep switching glasses around. I don't know what it is. But to start officially, the Lord be with you. You know, since basically the end of December, I have not preached regularly. And that's when I was last serving as an interim pastor for a congregation in Phoenix. But I got to thinking about, you know, what am I going to preach about here? And the 23rd Psalm just is one of those things that the Spirit just kind of put into my mind. What I did not realize at the time as I started preparing the sermon, that it was in the lectionary 3 weeks ago, and I think it was preached on here that Sunday. But that's okay. That's okay. There's many things that can be said about this psalm. It's one for the eternities, so to speak, and I hope you realize that too. What is your favorite Bible verse? Or we might ask, what do you think is the most well-known Bible verse? John 3:16, maybe? Sure, you know, that's one we all know. Or possibly something from the first couple lines of Genesis. Possibly some scripture from the Nativity story. When you think about it, we read those every year. We see them in Christmas cards, and they just sort of dwell in our minds. But I dare say that the 23rd Psalm might also be one of certainly the most well-known scriptures in the Bible, and certainly in the Old Testament. Even many people who do not read their Bible on a regular basis can often quote a line or two from the 23rd Psalm, if only because they've heard it so often at funerals. And it is appropriately used there, no doubt, because it is a comforting passage for most people who are going through the valley of darkness. But I think we make a mistake if we think of the 23rd Psalm just as a funeral text. We're really missing the point that the 23rd Psalm is about the living. It's a statement of our confidence in God and how we lead our lives. Whether we have dark valleys that we're in times of trouble, or actual passage through the process of death itself. We believe that God is not only with us, but He's more than equal to whatever threats there may be to our spiritual lives. Now there's a story that comes from the 1st century BC that may be somewhat apocryphal. It might be of questionable authority, or authenticity, I should say. But you may have heard it before. It's written a lot about it in commentaries, and I read it once many years ago, but it kind of stuck in my mind. But it's about a story that took place when much of the world was unexplored, unknown, and largely unmapped. Map makers back during that day had to have a way of illustrating those areas of the earth that had not yet been mapped. So they drew in pictures of monsters and dragons and large, fearsome-looking fish. And the message was clear. Uncharted territories were frightening, fearsome places. But it could indicate maybe that terrors lay there, but also map makers would also indicate sometimes treasures were there as well too. But the story is this. There was a commander of a battalion of Roman soldiers who was caught up in a battle that was taking them to one of these unknown areas. And the map makers had represented this area with monsters and dragons. Now, not knowing whether to continue forging into the unknown or possibly turning back into the known, which would have essentially been a retreat, he dispatched a messenger to Rome with the urgent request, please send new orders. We have marched off the map. And in a way, when you stop and think about it for a moment, the world around us is now marching off the map. Today we find ourselves in uncharted waters as we march off the technological map, the political map, the economic map, the environmental map, or the demographic map, and certainly the pandemic map. How can we possibly hope to navigate through these difficulties, through these uncharted realms that society has been facing? What would you say? You're supposed to say the 23rd Psalm. The 23rd Psalm is sometimes referred to as the 6th longest short verses in the Bible. The power of the 23rd Psalm comes from its use of two key words that we see in verse 4. The word though and the word through, which are essentially spelled the exact same way except for the single letter R. And it is this one little letter that makes all the difference in the world. It is a letter that can turn a situation in your life from being a though to a through. Even though I walk through the darkest valley. David, the innocent shepherd boy, knew the truth behind though. That is, there are dangers lurking around every corner. There was no if about the life obstacles and problems back then, and there isn't today either. So I just want to read out of context here, or in context, but a little different order here. I'd like to read, of course, the 23rd Psalm, which is in our worship lectionary. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely, goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. These words that we see in the 23rd Psalm candidly faces the inevitable in our lives. It does not proclaim if, but though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, as it says in some translations, or the darkest valley. Life is not always full of sunshine, overflowing cups, or green pastures. Sometimes your hair may not be anointed with oil. It may be greasy, it may be dirty. Sometimes we're not lying in green pastures, but floundering on a Monday, and we've got the blues. Sometimes we're not resting on the shore of still waters, but we might be struggling in the valley. That is, the valley of the shadow. And tragedy and sorrow might be with us. It happens to us all at some point in time. Every one of us has a valley. Again, at some point in your life, it's inescapable. Some of us have a valley that might have been given to us at birth. As we heard in the New Testament lection, Paul, he had a thorn in the flesh. But we don't really know what that was. Okay, he might have had a speech problem. There might have been some other difficulties he had. But each of us has difficulties. It may, in terms of a valley, it may be a valley of a disability. Maybe it's a medical problem. Possibly abuse. Or the valley of having a disadvantaged childhood. Some people, however, are born in green pastures of plenty, but they end up digging their own valleys of shadow. The drugs, alcohol, violence, ignorance, or prejudice. The psalmist accurately describes these persons as having, or as being ones who have dug a pit and they have fallen into it themselves, as we see in the 57th Psalm. But while we are walking through the valley of the shadow, the Bible tells us that God is with us, and He bears all the suffering and pains of the world and the hurts of our scarred and scared souls. Yes, God is with us in whatever that we face. For the Christian, on the cross, in addition to it being a symbol of ultimate hope, it also can be a symbol of the agony endured by creation and the Creator. Think about that for a moment. None of us can get out of life without walking through the valley sooner or later. And maybe it might even be on multiple occasions. It's sort of a though situation in life. That is, though something happens. But the psalmist made it clear that God does not intend for us to travel there forever. Winston Churchill, the famed wartime leader there in Great Britain, Churchill once said, "If you are going through hell, just keep on going." That's true. That's true. And if you think about it, that is kind of a unique way of looking at it. But the valley of the shadow is something that we go through. Think of it this way. Valleys are not resting places, but they're just passageways. But still, now we have to recognize there are certainly exceptions to this for some unfortunate people. But we can walk through our valleys. We can walk through our sorrows. We can walk through our pain. We can walk through the goof-ups and silly, stupid mistakes that we all make at some point in time. But what the 23rd Psalm promises us, and this is truly the most important point we have to remember, and that is that all of these journeys that we take, the Lord will walk through with us. Yes, the words though and through differ only by one letter, the letter R. In American Sign Language, or ASL, the letter is made by crossing the middle finger over the index finger. But crossed fingers have a history that far, far predate American Sign Language. In the first centuries of the church, when Christianity was illegal and Christians were being vigorously persecuted, believers found ways to communicate their faith in very subtle, kind of sneaky sort of ways. So accompanying a greeting or a farewell, crossed fingers were a code sign. And they identified Christians as other people as being a people of the cross. The cross fingers were a silent symbol for the cross of Christ and the redemption Christ's death on that cross brought to all people. Today, cross fingers, of course, can mean something very, very different. When placed behind one's back, it might mean that maybe, well, they're not really telling the truth. Or possibly, you might do this, and it might mean good luck. Okay? But we do have the spiritual resources that go beyond just good luck. Spiritual resources, that's a topic of another sermon. Now, in spite of God's promises of His presence in times of difficulty and sorrow, the question is often asked by Christians, if God is all-powerful and if God is all-loving, why does pain and suffering happen in our world? This is actually an entire area of Christian theology, and it's devoted to that particular topic. There have been entire books written on this topic. Now, I have to be honest with you and tell you that the answers do not always come very easy. Again, that's another sermon there. But one person who has extensively written on this topic is the Jewish Rabbi, Harold Kushner. Now, Harold Kushner is a fascinating person. He is a Jewish rabbi, so he is in the Jewish faith. He's retired now, but he's also a theologian. He's also a biblical scholar. He has his PhD from a university back east. But he wrote a wonderful book that's entitled, Who Needs God? Now, when he gave that book a title, he was not intending that, okay, to be a statement, okay, or actually it was a statement. I got backwards. He intended to be a statement, not a question. But his perspective does not come from academics, but also personal experience, as he and his wife lost their son to a terrible, terrible disease when he was in his early teens. Unlike most biblical scholars and theologians, much of Kushner's perspective was learned the hard way, through perspective, through experience. Another book that you may have heard of is called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It was published back in the 80s, 90s. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. And he also wrote another wonderful book titled The Lord is My Shepherd. What's that book about? That's 23rd Psalm. There you go. This book is a spiritual gold mine, and I encourage you to read it if you ever get the opportunity. Now, there's a lot that I could say about this book, but I'm just going to try to paraphrase a tiny bit of it. Kushner wrote that there's much fear in our world, vulnerability, uncertainty, and he says that God does not tell us that nothing bad is ever going to happen to us. Now, I should remind you that Jesus, the Apostle Paul, said the exact same thing in Scripture. But Kushner goes on to say that God does not control human events and all bad things that happen without taking away our free will. But He does give us the spiritual resources to overcome our fears. God is with us. He's by our side all the time. When sorrow, illness, and heartbreak comes and casts a shadow over us, He is there to fill the empty space. shadows occur because the sun is shining somewhere else. Think about that for a moment. If you're outside on a perfectly overcast day, and it's during the daytime, the sun's out there, but if it's a perfectly overcast day, are you going to see any shadows anywhere? No. It's when the sun is shining, there are clouds up there, but depending upon your position and the position of sun, you can see shadows. Okay? So the shadows are there, but when we go to these shadows in our life, the Lord spiritually puts His arms around us, and He leads us through the valley of the shadow and back out into warm sunlight. We, everyone here today in this sanctuary, will walk at some point in time. If you haven't yet, we will walk through the darkness of that valley. But we are not alone. God is with us. Because walking through that valley with us is the one and the person of Jesus Christ, who suffered and died for our sake. For thou art with me, as the psalmist said. And this is one of the greatest blessings that we have as a people of faith. Thanks be to God.